everyone, and welcome to Olsem Wanem. In this edition, we present you the Q&A debate on government accountability, communicating with the public. This Q&A is done in partnership with AusAid through the Economic and Public Sector Program. Expert panel members include Minister for National Planning, Charles Abel, Governor for Ora Province, Gary Juffa, CEO for National Fiscal Planning, Hohora Suve, Dame Carol Kidu, Anthony Yaweb, Secretary for Treasury Department, Denny Tokunai from the Government blog, Emmanuel Narakobi from the Masalai blog, and Alex Rini, editor for Post Korea. The facilitator is Mr. Alan Bird. The questions on the table include what information should be shared by the government and how should it be communicated, and what is the role of the media and social media.
Minister, what do you think the government ought to be communicating with the public? And having said that, are you happy with the level of communication that government has been currently having with the people?
Now, Alan, it's a very broad and a big topic, and generally speaking, we all know that the government has not really done enough to communicate in all aspects. From the budgetary process, how the budget is formulated, to the budget itself, and then through to how the funds get expended in a physical sense in terms of through treasury and planning and finance, right down to the provincial governments, and then once it gets to some of the executing agencies, how it then gets expended from there. And it is something that we are conscious of, and as a new government, we are trying very, very hard to improve on some of these things. We are very conscious of the primary imperative, and that is to start actually delivering goods and services in a much better manner. But at the back of it, as part of our monitoring and reporting and accountability effort, we're also very conscious that we've been remiss there. And because of that weakness in the governance and reporting structure, it has very much facilitated and encouraged abuse of public funds. And you've seen some of what I've been doing, which is starting to bring some of the reports to Parliament on a regular basis, in the first instance showing people where the money has gone. But we need our people to understand exactly how this process works, I think. And as I say, that is an ongoing effort. But things like having the budget online, which it is at the moment, things like starting to bring out reports on a regular basis as to the warranting of public funds, how much is going out. So you know what the budget is, you know where the money has been appropriated. That's the first thing to understand, after understanding the planning process. And then you should know how to follow the trail of the money then from that point from consolidated revenue down through to the executing agencies. We talked today downstairs about simple things like, the media tends to come in and televise question time only. Why don't we allow the media to go to televise the whole of the parliamentary debates, including question time? Why are they limited only to question time? Many important things are said afterwards, and they should also be televised, I think. Let's get the process of reporting started while we continue to improve it, and let's do our best to make it available to the public. Let's all participate in forums such as this. Let's make Parliament more robust and transparent. Let's be as open as possible. Let's try and maintain a very open line of communication with our people. What is there to hide, It is their right to know exactly how this process happens.
I'll now move to some of the members of the panel. Would one of you like to continue on with that? What do you think the government ought to be communicating to the public? What are your bloggers interested in?
For those of you who aren't familiar with the work I do, I run a blog which focuses on the politics of PNG. So from purely the perspective of an individual who is not within the political system and taking into account the interests of my readership and my own interest in government accountability and transparency, I think one of the biggest areas where people, including myself, are very interested in is the area of what I call parliamentary accountability and transparency. So small things, for example, making parliamentary process and procedures and the relevant content available online. So our citizens from around the country can have a simple platform to understand what's going on in Parliament. If you look at established democracies around the world, particularly not just exclusively Western democracies, but those are the things that are normal. They're the norm. Anybody in the world can hop on the internet and see what the Australian Parliament or the New Zealand Parliament or the Indian Parliament talked about 2 weeks ago. That function doesn't exist in PNG, and I think it's to the detriment of the quality of democracy that we do have in the country. So it's not difficult to address, it's quite simple. I note that the government recently supported the Fijian government with a 50 million kina loan. And my personal opinion is if a similar support could be sourced to strengthen our own internal democracy, that would be a good thing.
Just add on to what Dan is saying, and maybe sort of a response to some of the questions. I'm involved also with Transparency International. I'm a director of Transparency International, and we're supporting a project with the Speaker of Parliament at the moment now, which is called the Open Parliament Project. So basically what Danny was talking about, having a website up there so that, and a page for all of the ministers, so we can see what legislation they passed, what committees they're on, what they voted for, attendance and so forth. And information and data that comes out doesn't have to be colored good or bad. I think just basic statistics such as this member of parliament did this, he went in and he voted for that, and then allow people to decide on it. So we're hopeful that the Open Parliament project with the Speaker's office will be able to contribute to that.
What do you think are some of the issues in relation with government communicating information to the public? Issues, difficulties, if you may, Dame?
I want to come from another angle because we're talking fairly high level. I want to talk about government communicating what it does in terms of legislative and policy development to the people on the ground. My observation as a minister and observation as a citizen is there's a real disconnect between what is done at the national level and what's happened on the ground reality, even here in the city of Port Moresby. For example, in 2002, all the criminal amendments on rape, the amendments to the Evidence Act, all of those things, how many people at grassroots level actually know what those amendments were to the Rape Act, how the Evidence Act has been amended so that when they go to court they can demand certain things? The knowledge is not there. So on many occasions, the government is doing its work in legislative and policy reform, but we're not getting it out there. The old Office of Information was closed long ago, and it wouldn't be any point opening it again as it was because it doesn't have tentacles all on the ground. So we need to go what to these people do for the tentacles on the ground, in my opinion. We've got to leapfrog our people into the future. We've got to use modern technology and look towards tally centres, community learning centres that become tally centres for people. We've got to look to classrooms without walls like they do with the Commonwealth of Learning, and we must get knowledge out to our people and specifically produce knowledge on some of these reforms that are occurring so that the people, when they learn this, when they learn that under the Lookout in Piccaninny Act, their province should be putting a Lookout in Piccaninny committee in place, a provincial one, and so on. And if you have a Lookout in Piccaninny committee here in NCD, that committee could go and monitor clubs. No individual is going to monitor a club, but a committee can, if they're mandated to do so, and they can hold them accountable. So how can we make sure that the policies and laws that we do actually get implemented? How can we do that? That's, I think, is a big thing, and it's all about communication. How can we get that knowledge out to our people so they then have the knowledge, which is power, to hold government accountable? That's where I think there's a real crux as well. Not just the delivery of goods and services, but the delivery of knowledge. And how do we manage with the delivery of knowledge to the masses of people who may be illiterate? So then again, we need community radio while we wait for the IT, community radio, multiplicity of languages. We've got to tackle these issues. Everyone in Papua New Guinea deserves the right to knowledge. And so we've got to tackle those really basic issues.
Just to follow on from what you've just said, do you think this lack of communication, this communication disconnect with ordinary citizens, does that help fuel things like corruption and so on, hamper service delivery?
I don't know about fuels corruption, but it fuels discontent and frustration, I think, amongst people feeling that they just don't have the knowledge.
Alex, can I come to you on this one, and maybe you can comment further on what Dame was just talking about?
Yeah, definitely. I would think so. I mean, coming from the newspaper's perspective, we get all kinds of information from government. It's up to, and then we tailor make that information as best as we can to the layman's language. So there's a lot of opportunity there for us to collaborate and to become partners with government instead of in terms of getting that information out. Community centers that Dame Carol was talking about, I think that's a very, very good idea. I think that will work. Getting Papua New Guineans to actually have information, interpreting that information and bringing it down to their own levels.
Thank you very much, Alex. Do you think the media has a social obligation to report on government activities in terms of some of this data that the Minister is just talking about? What are the issues surrounding all of these reporting activities? And
I think that the media has a responsibility to report on social issues. We're the fourth estate. We would like to see ourselves as a monitoring mechanism, not only of government. I mean, one of the issues that the Papua New Guinea currently has at the moment is the fact that we don't have a really strong civil society, and I think that's a role there for the media to actually come in and fill in that gap. So we would like to partner with government agencies. I think it's our responsibility, and I think government agencies have a responsibility as well to embrace that partnership for the benefit of Papua New Guineans.
Thank you, Alex. I'll go over to you, Anthony. You want to add something?
Yeah, just wanted to make a point about the reports that are produced, and obviously they need to be accessible, but they also need to be understood. And so I guess just reverting to, or circling back to some of the earlier comments about the quality of reporting amongst different stakeholders, and particularly through the published media, I think sometimes it's not very easy to understand some of the fiscal reports we present. And whilst the Department of Treasury doesn't have a formal disclosure policy beyond what the statutory mandates are, there's been some thinking about how we can interact better with different stakeholders, particularly print media, to try and explain exactly what the fiscal accounts are, what the meaning behind the numbers are, what the implications, etc., so that there can be better quality reporting.
I'll go across to Emmanuel now. Accountability. Do you think that what you're doing in social media, the groups that are aggregating around social media, do you think that's going to improve some of these issues that we're talking about in terms of government communications?
I think so, absolutely. And social media is just one part of it. It's not everything. It's probably maybe the most exciting part of it now because it's new. But it will be one of a whole range of different things. That's why I was mentioning a communication strategy in terms of all the different areas of the media industry that need to play a part in it. But social media is interesting in its own because that's where it's anyone can have a voice.
Do you think PNG politicians, bureaucrats are maybe afraid of taking a risk to use social media?
I think I'll have to ask the two, but I mean my own thoughts. I think the way I see that there's sort of two general reasons why there's a obvious lack of proactiveness on the part of our politicians to use social media, particularly when you compare them to their colleagues in Australia and New Zealand. And the whole idea around not just politicians but bureaucrats and even celebrities using social media in those environments is about engagement. It's social media. The whole idea is making connections with people and having them engaged. So I mean, presumably, if you're an MP and you value the idea of engaging your constituents, then one of the methods you would quite possibly consider is social media, particularly in terms of the fact what I've just said about the demographics and the future of this country. So it makes sense for politicians and bureaucrats to utilize social media to disseminate information relevant to their field. And I think that's probably a good reason why we don't see a big uptake in politicians using social media, is that it's what I like to call the comfort of Waigani, where politicians are used to being isolated from their constituents in Waigani. Not everyone, generally speaking. So social media ever so slowly is eroding away those barriers, whereby now all it needs for a constituent from the bush in Nuku, for example, is a tweet or a Facebook message to his member of parliament. Whether or not the member of parliament responds to that tweet or message is entirely up to him or her. But the point is that technology is slowly eroding these traditional silos where our MPs past and present have have become comfortable with and operate in. And that's an important point.
Governor Jufa, what do you think? Do you think your communication of national issues down there at the province, how is that going, and would you like to comment on that?
At the provincial level, there is a huge lack of information in regards to national issues, and people generally don't know as much as they should. And as the dame said, that causes a lot of frustrations, and if you don't keep your people informed, then they will make up their own stories, and they'll come up with their own conclusions, and they will spread rumor and rhetoric and so forth. So you've got to make an effort, I'm speaking from my perspective as a parliamentarian, to keep in touch with them. And I do that by way of radio and phone. I make an effort to call people in the tribal lands, up in the mountains, wherever they are, and they put the phone on speaker, and I talk to them. And I spend some time explaining to them what I'm doing. I speak several of our languages, so I can do that in language or in Pidgin or English. And I feel that by doing that, I satisfy them to some degree so that they at least feel comforted that I'm doing something. Radio is probably the most important medium of communication in the province. Unfortunately, the services are decaying. They're not reaching out to the rural areas, and the government needs to improve on that. People in very remote parts of Papua New Guinea, in remote parts of my province, they don't get the radio. They're fortunate enough to have the phone. Nowadays, they have phones that have an internet function. So people are, especially younger people, they're on the internet and they're able to see what you're doing by tapping into the internet stream. I'm also on Facebook and all that, and I spend some time to try and answer questions. There is also TV, but TV gets there, again, it's to a very limited audience. And newspaper gets there a couple of days late. Then there is word of mouth. Word of mouth is probably the most important form of communication for Papua New Guineans. We have an oral tradition, and that's how we spread information, by talking. So you've got to do that. And the best way that we do it in Papua New Guinea is, in Pidgin they call it tokbogis. You've got to paint a picture in the person's mind so that they can see it. And when they see that, then they can take it back to their community, their families, and they can paint that same picture so that the people, they can understand exactly what's happening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all those comments. Actually, when you look at it and I think about it, we have got tons and tons of reports, actually, and they're pouring into Parliament all the time. So, in fact, a lot of the content is there. It's the quality of it, and it's the timeliness of it, and it's the channels. It's the channels that take it down to the appropriate levels that is the concern. And when I talk about rebuilding the infrastructure and so on, it's not just the communication channels, obviously. It starts off with the transport and all the other channels that transfer services and information, everything else down into the village and into the towns and so on. And that is what we're rebuilding. In Alatau district, for example, I'm building the roads, I'm putting in the jetties, I'm creating the transport systems. But on top of that, I'm making sure the communication infrastructure is in place, because you've got to have the channels to get goods and services and information down to the village level. So for example, through Digicel, an arrangement I have with them, this year I'll complete the Digicel rollout in the whole of Alatau district. In terms of the radio, I've just paid a contractor through the normal process to complete the boosting of the FM signal for Radio Millen Bay. So in the village, they'll be able to have access to the phone, hence the internet and Facebook, and of course listen to the radio. A very important part of the process, which we've just raised now and Dame talks about, is actually getting it down to, physically getting it to the community and getting it to them in a language and a format that they can understand. And much of our activity, particularly at subnational level, is the concentration on that.
I want to move to some of the people that do the actual work of putting together data for the public. You run the National Economic Fiscal Commission, and you print some reports which speak about expenditure at the provincial level. Would you like to talk about that, and what does it mean for the public?
We actually get all the data from PGES, the Provincial Expenditure Review, from all the provinces, and we analyze that. So we look at all the different sectors, basically health, education, transport infrastructure, village courts, agriculture. And we target that to very specific areas, 11 minimum priority activities, we call them. We've been publishing that data, then we've been taking that out to the provinces, sit down, have workshops with them, see the trends as to how they spend, and to get them to do something about it. We've been trying to help all provinces, and we have evidence-based data. I know that civil servants tend to take knock from politicians, but the data that we publish actually shows spending that's happening out there. So, as I've been saying in my workshop, it's actually a mirror. Provinces have a look at that to see how they're spending. Whether they're actually spending it or not, the challenge is there now. So we have Auditor General's Office, we have PLASMA, Provincial Local Level Government Monitoring Authority, as set up under the Constitution, is supposed to monitor this expenditure. But one thing we're trying to take up is social auditing. I think CIMC, of which Minister is chairman, they've been doing that. Social auditing, we spend all right, but we need a community out there. We need a civil society out there to tell us what's happening, whether the money that's spending is taking place. The idea is to bring more accountability. Let community sort of say, okay, the money is going out, but is it happening?
Anthony, would you like to add to that and maybe speak about what you do in your department, Anthony?
Thank you. Treasury does a number of things with respect to the budget. One thing we do encourage is an open budget process. Some of that is stipulated in legislation, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, for example, Public Finances Management Act. We're also required under the legislation that we administer to report, to provide aggregate reports during the course of the year, as well as at the end of the year. We have quarterly budget review processes. So at the end of the first quarter, second, third, and the final quarter, we have to review the performance of agencies, particularly with respect to financial performance. Shortly, we'll be releasing the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook, which is a mid-year report that tracks the performance of government at a high level of aggregation. And then at the end of the fiscal year, which coincides with the calendar year, we also produce a final budget outturn report. One of the things we're particularly sensitive to is that the information that we release to the public needs to be done in a way where there is assurances around the integrity of the data, the quality of the data, the timeliness. We're also undertaking, I think, a number of initiatives to try and strengthen sort of fiscal transparency and to build ownership and accountability within government. We do have a website, www.treasury.gov.pg. We do publish the budget calendar. We show the medium-term fiscal strategy, the medium-term debt strategy. That's all on there. All the budget documents are up there as well. All treasurer statements are also presented up there. So we do have a high level, we think, of transparency.
That's all we have time for. There are more questions and answers from the panel members and the public from this debate on your next edition of Olsem Wanem. For more information on any of the issues talked about at this Q&A, please see the website addresses showing on the screen. Don't forget to check us out on our Facebook page. Enjoy the rest of your viewing on your #1 station, MTV.